Good morning. So how's everybody feeling about the presidential election this year? Why does everybody laugh when I ask that question? Maybe it's because you feel like the rest of America today. I've been talking to a lot of people through the primary process, and I can sense the frustration in people. And what are we going to do? And it looks like two nominees have emerged. And so I kind of went online and I did a little research using some polls, Associated Press polls and Reuters polls, and I discovered that 70% of Americans describe themselves as frustrated with the current political situation with the presidential election. So anybody here in that 70% want to admit that they're in the 70%? Right, we're all kind of frustrated. A lot of us are, not everybody. 13% are actually proud of the situation. So 13% of Americans are glad that where we're at. I found out a couple other discouraging stats. One is that 4% of people actually have faith in Congress to actually do anything, to change anything, right? And so that's kind of disappointing to see that. I didn't think it would be that low, but that's where we are today. And I was also surprised that 51% of Americans believe the primary election system is rigged. And, that's an opinion. These are opinion polls. But it's interesting that people look at the primary process as being not an equitable process. At least half of Americans are saying this process is not a fair process, or they believe that it's rigged somehow, or that it's, and I think that may come from the frustration of what the leadership is and the candidates are. So, what do we do? What do you do when you're frustrated with the political system? What do you do when you're not happy with the leadership of your nation and your country? And does God have anything to say about it? Well, there was a time and a season in Israel's life when there were systems in place that people were frustrated by. In fact, they were, at that time when Micah is writing, he's writing in a time of the nation of Israel when there were corrupt economic systems. And so what was happening was, much like in today's country, the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. And the reason that was happening is that there were economic systems set up in Israel where wealthy business owners were not being held accountable to their weights and measurements, the system they were using to weigh and measure out crops, to pay for the crops, to pay for the grain. And so they were using false weights, dishonest scales. And so Micah's speaking into this corrupt economic system and speaking to the wealthy and saying, what you all are doing is not right. It is not just. And he says, so you can bring thousands of gallons, thousands of rivers, he actually says. You could bring 10,000 rivers of oil to God as an offering, and it wouldn't matter because you got that oil in a deceptive way. You got that oil by dishonest means. So your offering means nothing to God. First, go back and do what is right, then come back and make your offering to God. Then he's not saying don't worship God, don't offer to God, but your offerings are tainted by the corruption of your system. Some people would argue we have a corrupt political system, that there's corruption in the system, or that somehow, we entrust leaders with this system and they don't seem to be doing what we hope they would do. So Micah speaks into this and he says to go do three things. He says, what's good? What does God require of you? To act justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. Makes it simple, right? And we look at those things, and I want to unpack those things. The first thing that Micah says, if you're going to create the good, if you're going to be a part of doing good in the world, then the first thing you have to do is act justly. Now, justice in this particular instance, he's basically saying to the business owners, to the corrupt system, he's saying, start doing the right thing. Start using right measurements. Make the choice to have some integrity and act right and do the right thing when it comes to measuring, when it comes to your scales. Set your scales right. Stop playing the game because no one's holding you accountable. Stop playing the game and working the system and do the right thing. To act justly is to do the right thing and act in a right way. Do you know that there are still, not only, we can talk about the political system in America, but there are greater needs around our world. There are actually other corrupt systems around our world. And even though we think that we have somehow moved beyond slavery in our world, there are nations, there are places around the world where slavery still exists. Human slavery still exists in our world. And that is because business owners hire people who are in debt. And then they don't pay them a fair wage. They offer them housing, they offer them food, but these conditions are often squalid conditions that they're living in. They move away from their families, and they come into these housing units, and they live and they work long days from morning till night, and they work 12, 14-hour days, and they get paid a very small wage. And what the business owners do is they pay them just enough to think they're earning enough to pay off their debt, but they'll never earn enough to actually pay off the entire debt. And so they've duped them because often these folks are uneducated or aren't aware of how the debt system works, so they pay them just enough, but not enough for them to ever get out of debt. So they keep them in perpetual debt, and so they are slaves for their entire lives using that system. And so it's a corrupt system that enslaves people. So they use debt to do that. That's happening around our world in multiple places. Did you know that? Did you know there's slavery in today's world? That this is going on? There are corrupt systems around our world. The other thing about justice is that it's about doing the right thing and acting in a right way. I think in today's American culture, though, we get justice and vengeance confused because we watch a lot of movies. And if you watch movies, especially action movies, it's all about not justice, it's about getting even, right? It's about revenge often, it's about vengeance. And there are times when leaders, at least in the movies, are making decisions that bring about getting even. It's not about doing the right thing. Sometimes it is, but I would find that most of the action movies that I see are not about that. And so we sometimes can easily get confused this idea of justice with vengeance. In fact, as I read World War II history, I'm a fan of military history, and because I grew up, sitting around the dinner table with my grandfather and his brothers talking about World War II, so that got me reading about World War II. And one of the things about World War II is that what started it all is well known. It was Pearl Harbor. The Japanese came and they attacked Pearl Harbor and drew us into World War II. So what often we don't hear about, or maybe you're not even aware of, is that after Pearl Harbor was bombed, President Roosevelt and the Joint Chiefs of Staff developed a plan to bomb Tokyo in retaliation for the bombing for the raid on Pearl Harbor. So they wanted to get back at Japan, and they wanted to do it quickly. So they devised a plan. They sent 80 service airmen into the air in bombers, and they bombed Tokyo. And this is well known. This is called the Doolittle raid. Doolittle was the person in charge of this raid. So they took off. They flew to Tokyo. They bombed Tokyo. They did very little damage to Tokyo. There was very little damage done in this bombing raid. It was more kind of like, it was really about just getting even. It was really just about sending a message. And so when they did this, there was little tactical advantage to this. There was little destruction that happened in Tokyo as a result of this bombing raid, and 80 servicemen, American, put their lives on the line to do this raid. Now the thing about it was considered at this time a potential suicide mission because they had enough fuel to get to Tokyo from the aircraft carriers, but they didn't have enough fuel to get back. So they landed, many of them landed or parachuted, or most of them ditched their planes in China and parachuted in and landed in China, which was the plan because we were allies with China at the time, and so they were going to go into China. So this all happens. We bombed Tokyo. 3 servicemen lost their lives in action. 8 were captured by the Japanese and interned in POW camps. 3 of them lost their lives in camps. And then what people don't know about this story, and what our history tends to neglect in its telling of this story, is that after that, what we did was we risked the lives of the Chinese in this situation. So after that happened, the Japanese army went into China looking for the airmen. And they led a scorched earth campaign in China. And 250,000 women, children, and men lost their lives because they aided us in that raid. That's a huge cost of human life. Not American life, but Chinese life. And how often do you hear about the risk that the Chinese took for us to just simply send a message to Tokyo to get even? See, the thing about vengeance is vengeance just leads to more vengeance. Justice often is geared to lead to right the wrongs and lead to stopping the injustice. It doesn't lead to more vengeance. So you can always kind of start to see the result, whether it was vengeance or justice that we seek. And I think we also owe our thankfulness to the families of those 250,000 people who aided our servicemen and women. And then how do you weigh that? How do you weigh the value of a human life? Is a Chinese life worth more than American life? And how many? You know, whose life matters more? I think God has a perspective on that because God created all life. So to act justly is to value all life. The other thing, though, that Micah goes on to say is, okay, do the right thing, but here's the other thing he adds. He says, God wants us to love kindness, to love it. Not just like it, but love it. How many people, what do you love to do? If you weren't sitting here listening to this sermon, what would you love to do right now? What would you love to be doing right now? Hiking. What else? Being at the ocean. What else? What? Reading. Eating chocolate. Anybody? All right. Going to a Orioles game. Anybody like going to a Orioles game? Right? Do you love doing that? Do you love going and seeing a sporting event? There are things that we love to do in our free time. They're what we call our hobbies. We love doing those things. How much time and energy do we do those things? And do we love doing them? Some we love to travel. Well, Micah is saying, love kindness that way. The way that you and I love sports, we're to love being kind to others the same way. The way that you and I love our hobbies or love our passions or love to do these things or love hiking or love exercising or love vacationing, all that things that we love to do, Micah says, love that way, being kind to other people. Make it your life's mission to be kind. Not only to act justly, but to be kind and merciful to other people. Figure out ways to put a smile on someone else's face. Figure out a way to bring joy to somebody else's life. Make that your life's hobby. Make that what you love to do. And I will tell you that if you do that, you do love it, right, when it happens. It's the joy. To make that your life's mission, your life's hobby, to do that, to love kindness. Another way of translation that I learned was to love mercy. Just love being merciful. And what is mercy? It's being kind to someone even when they don't deserve it. So what Micah is saying to the wealthy business owners is, be kind to the poor. You may not think they deserve it, but they do. But be kind to them anyway. Be merciful anyway. Choose that. And then he says the third thing. Act justly, love kindness, but he says the thing that ties it all together. He says, walk humbly with God. Because it's our relationship with God, it's our walking humbly with God that ties these things together, that enables us to act justly and to love kindness. See, when we are walking humbly with God, it means we are respecters of God and respecters of God's people. When we go out hiking, there's a principle in the wilderness. When you go out camping, hiking, backpacking, national park, state park, wherever you go, there's a principle at work called leave no trace, which means when you walk through this place that God has created, respect it. Show respect for it. Don't break it up. Don't damage it. Don't throw your granola bar wrappers on the side of the trail. Don't leave your water bottles on the side of the trail. Leave no trace. Leave no trace other than your footprints that you have been there. One, out of respect for God's creation, but also out of respect for the others that will walk behind you. The others that will come down that same path behind you when you're gone, what will you leave them? And that kind of, if we walk humbly with God, we're a respecter of life. We're a respecter of what God has blessed us with and gifted us with. And we're also thinking about the generations that will walk behind us. And what will we leave for them as we live this life? What is our legacy? Have we left this world better than when we came into it? So, back to the presidential election. Don't we want leaders who will act justly, do the right thing, put things right? Don't we want leaders in politics that will love being kind to other people, that will be kind and merciful? And don't we want leaders who will walk humbly with God, who want to leave this world better than the way they found it? Don't we want those kind of leaders? The other thing I would say that I look for in a president is I want to know that they walk humbly with God. I want to know that that's a person that turns to God when the tough decisions come. Someone who prays to God, someone who says, God, I need your help because this decision is bigger than me. That's a sign of humility, actually. I'm not going to figure this out myself, or I'm not going to just figure it out because of what my advisors are saying to me. I need your help, God, in this process to lead. We need leaders who humble themselves before God and walk humbly with God. Now, the frustration is we take that idea of leadership and then we start to compare our current candidates. And I'm not going to go down that road right now. But we have this idea of who we want our leaders to be, and then have you noticed, though, that this isn't the first time this has happened? So it says that there's something wrong with the system that keeps putting these leaders in place. Right? So what can we do about it? Well, we can work to change the system. We can work, we can vote, we can align ourselves with organizations that will change the system, that will bring forth the leadership that we are hoping for and longing for. We can align ourselves with organizations that will end human slavery around the world. We can leave no trace as we live our own lives, and we can walk humbly with God as we live this life on our own, and we can live our own lives in such a way that we walk humbly with God and leave no trace other than our footprints, and leave it better than the way we found it, our families, our communities. But there's one other thing that Micah says that may be very familiar to you that kind of gives me hope. I want to share it with you. It's a verse out of Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Micah wrote this before he wrote chapter 6. He said to the people of that day, "But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel." Do you know who Micah's talking about? Jesus, right? Jesus, even though the leaders of that day were not the leaders that Micah was hoping for, what Micah is saying is that 700 years from now, he didn't know that, but 700 years from now, the true leader's coming. God's still in control. God is still in charge. God still has a plan. Even though things may look bad right now, it doesn't mean that God hasn't stopped working. And that God will raise forth for you a leader, a true leader, who will act justly, who will love kindness, and who will walk humbly with God, and that was Jesus. And that's whom we serve today. And that's who we follow today. So I want to leave you with this thought that there is a third party in our nation. And you are the third party. The followers of Christ are the third party. And we are to be the ones, it's our civic duty to work for the change that we want to see happen so that we can have leaders who do these three things. So go be God's people. Go be the third party. Do what God requires you to do to act justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly. Amen.